The phrase "shaped by God" was first coined by my predecessor, Bishop Martyn, way back in 2005. As the diocese was seeking a way forward for the future, he coined this phrase, "Shaped by God, we seek the kingdom of God," through, and then there were three particular foci: depth of discipleship, growing the numbers of disciples, and loving and serving of the world. This was all agreed by Diocesan Synod in 2005, and even at that time there were explorations about different models of mission and ministry. So some churches adopted ministry teams, others went into mission partnerships, and some of these still exist today. And as a diocese, around that same time, we also began the exploration of fresh expressions of church, connecting with people who would never come to our normal church services. And we've had many lay pioneers and indeed now ordained pioneers who've been involved in these fresh expressions of church. Now, the Shaped by God's strategy was renewed in 2009 and again in 2014. And then when I arrived in 2016, it was a large part of why I wanted to come here to Leicester. I was attracted by this vision and this approach to church life. However, I also realised when I arrived here that it needed sharpening and just focusing a little bit more. And so I turned the three foci into questions, three key questions which I wanted all clergy and all churches to be able to answer. I was very clear, it's not for me to answer these questions, but rather it is for me to ask the questions and to explore how they can be answered by our local churches. So the first one was about how are you growing the numbers of disciples of Jesus? Then secondly, how are you growing in the depth of discipleship? And thirdly, how are you engaging in loving service of the world? As well as sharpening those three foci, I also noticed some gaps when I arrived here. So in particular, that the numbers of global majority heritage people in our churches nothing like matched the numbers of global majority heritage Christians in the city and county. So we've had a particular focus on that and intercultural worshipping communities. We noticed that our fresh expressions of church, while they often grew rapidly, were struggling to be sustained over long periods. We began exploring, therefore, how church planting sits alongside fresh expressions of church, and we're doing both now. We also saw that our schools were, in some sense, at arm's length, if you like, from many of our churches. Yes, there were contacts in terms of clergy going in to take assemblies, but there wasn't that deep link between the two, which I believe can be hugely healthy and beneficial for both. Alongside all of this, we realised some time ago that our finances were not in a great place. We've been hugely blessed in terms of the historic reserves that we have, particularly in terms of land and buildings and so on. We've also been very blessed in terms of the grants that we've received from the national church. But our core income, parish share, parish contributions, does not match our core expenditure. And then, of course, in the midst of all of that, we were hit in 2020 by the pandemic and the repeated lockdowns that we had in Leicester in particular. So in many ways, we began at that time in 2020 to consider even more seriously the future shape of mission and ministry, with all these different factors, changes in society, our financial issues, together with the need to engage with children and young people, global majority heritage people and so on. All of this needed to be brought together in a new way. So, in 2020, we started a whole listening exercise, exploring how our churches, how our schools might need to adapt, and wanting to gather your thoughts about how that might happen. It was a great exercise, I have to say. I benefited enormously from reading the many, many stories that were offered from churches and schools and fresh expressions over that time. Following that, some small working groups were set up to begin to explore possibilities for the future, and they came up with three possible models of mission and ministry for the future. The Bishop's Council, together with area deans and lay chairs, all came together then to review these three models, and we spent a lot of time thinking through them and assessing their strengths and weaknesses. And it was from that we developed the hybrid model, if you like, which we now call Minster Communities. It was agreed by Diocesan Synod in October 2021 by a strong majority in Synod. So now, alongside these structural changes, if you like, of Minster Communities, bringing churches and schools together to work in wider groups, we are also encouraging all our worshipping communities to develop how they enable discipleship, how they encourage vocations, and how they grow outwardly in mission and service of the world, engaging in particular with children and young people across our schools. This then is much of the background as we seek to follow Jesus Christ in this day and age, and as we seek to share the good news of Jesus with others. It's about seeking the kingdom of God, keeping our eyes focused on this new world that we believe God is creating. It's about how we grow in our faith and our trust in God, in all the changing circumstances of life, knowing that if we trust in God, we can know the fullness of life that Jesus came to bring. And it's about how we love and serve this world that God created, a world which we know is often in so much pain and so much suffering. But with that seed of hope planted within us, we can come alongside others, be with them, and share something of the love of God with them. Thank you for all that you do, particularly for those who've been a part of this journey over the last 20 or more years, as we have begun to be shaped by God together. I look forward with hope and with confidence to the future. God is reshaping us, but God is at work among us and through us. And therefore, I keep my eyes focused on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.